On the 14th of April 1943, the guards of Sachsenhausen Concentration Camp had a huge problem on their hands. Lying prone on the floor next to the barbed wire fence, dead, was the son of one of the most powerful men of the whole of the Second World War. For a while, the son of Stalin, Yakov Dzhugashvili, remained in German captivity within the concentration camps, but he was despised by his powerful father, and Stalin's relationship with him cost him his life. Stalin had the chance to save his son, but he refused to do this, and this secured the fate of him, and prison swaps even for Hitler's nephew were rejected by Stalin, as he saw the disgrace of his own son falling into the enemy hands as treason. But Stalin's son had a terrible ordeal, and he was rather volatile himself. But how did he end up inside of a German concentration camp, and what happened with his death? Welcome to The Untold Past. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe. Yakov Dzhugashvili was born to a man who at the time was a bank robber. There was absolutely no idea that his father would become the Soviet dictator and one of the most powerful men across the world. Stalin did not even have his name. He was known as Joseph Dzhugashvili. He had previously robbed a bank in Tiflis and stole roughly $3.4 million for the Bolsheviks, and this led Stalin to become closer to Lenin and the seats of communist power. But the police knew of his whereabouts, and the family were then forced to flee to Azerbaijan. Eventually, 9 months after Yakov's birth, his mother died, and she was just 22 years old. Stalin then adopted the Stalin surname, and he delved further into his political beliefs, and he abandoned his son with the family of his dead wife. But the relationship Yakov had with his father was terrible, and this in a sense was torture. Stalin was a very distant father at best, and he physically and emotionally terrorised his son, and he banned him from changing his surname to Stalin, and claimed he would never be like him. He had a huge hatred for his son, and this is possible because Yakov had the same mannerisms and looks as his mother, and the grief-stricken Stalin could not cope with this. He even at the funeral of his beloved and Yakov's mother, jumped into the grave and carried his wife's body. But then in 1921, Dzhugashvili was sent to Moscow to live with his father, and this was especially difficult as he did not understand Russian, and his father continued to ignore him. He lived within Stalin's apartments in the Kremlin, but he slept in the dining room, and not even in a bedroom. But further awful treatment came as Stalin did not allow Yakov to go to university to begin with, and he was admitted to study at the Institute of Transport much later than he wanted to, and he had different jobs before he became part of an artillery academy. But in these years, Yakov made an attempt on his life because of his father. He was in a very serious relationship with the daughter of an Orthodox priest, and Yakov wanted to marry her, but Stalin banned this, and Yakov in response shot himself in the chest and just missed his heart. Stalin mocked his son, claiming that he couldn't even shoot straight, but the torture continued even throughout the Second World War. Yakov Dzhugashvili in 1941 enrolled to become part of the Red Army Artillery Academy, as his father ordered him to do so, and he was appointed to the position of commander of an artillery battery. He took this position shortly before the German invasion of the Soviet Union, known as Operation Barbarossa. Yakov was in reserve, and when the fight came to the doorstep of the Soviet Union, he was sent to fight the Germans on the front lines. Stalin told him to go and fight, and he called him to tell him this, rather than even go and see his own son for the final time in person. The might of the German army was too much to begin with for the Red Army, and they rampaged into different lands and territories. But within a matter of weeks, Yakov Dzhugashvili, the son of Stalin, became a prisoner of war. He was fighting as a lieutenant with the battery of the 14th Howitzer Regiment of the 14th Tank Division near to Vitebsk, but on the 16th of July 1941, less than a month after the invasion of the Soviet Union had begun, he was captured. For the Germans this was a huge coup, as they had the son of Stalin, the great enemy of Hitler, in their possession and custody. Regarding the arrest of Yakov, it was said that the Germans surrounded Yakov's battery. The order was given to retreat, but Yakov did not obey the order. I tried to persuade him, but Yakov answered, "I am the son of Stalin, and I do not permit the battery to retreat." It was also claimed that he may have actually been the victim of underhand tactics by fellow soldiers, as it has been claimed that his fellow Red Army soldiers gave him up as they hated Stalin and his government. Others claim that he surrendered willingly to the enemy. But for the Germans this was huge, and 3 days after the capture, they announced that they had Stalin's son to the world, and the Soviet dictator was furious. He was outraged, and he wished his son would have shot himself rather than surrender, and he wanted his own son dead. There are no two words for it. Stalin's anger was relentless, and Yakov was interrogated, and during this he was rather hostile to his own father and the Red Army. But the Germans had no want themselves to execute or torture him, as Stalin's son was seen as too valuable an asset. They treated him well and civil, and when they questioned him they wanted to know more about his own life, rather than what the plan was for the Soviet Red Army. They may have even wanted him to defect into a high-ranking position against his father, and he sort of fed the Germans what they wanted to hear. He claimed the Red Army were not ready, and that they had poor training and were very ill-disciplined, and he criticised the British also. He also shockingly praised Hitler and the Germans, claiming they were the only remaining empire across Europe, and that the continent would be nothing without them. The intention by the Germans was to use Yakov in propaganda against the Red Army, and they distributed a propaganda leaflet across the Soviet lines with the text reading, "This is Yakov Dzhugashvili, Stalin's son and artillery officer, who on the 16th of July has surrendered near Vibetsk, together with thousands of other soldiers and officers. Follow his example. He is alive and well, and feels great. Why do you fight to the death when even the son of your leader has surrendered?" But shockingly in response, the Soviet Union and Stalin awarded Yakov with the Order of the Red Banner. But he was then sent to Berlin and was locked up inside a guarded villa, and was kept comfortable, as Goebbels wanted to use him to make radio broadcasts. But after these plans failed, Yakov was then moved to Sachsenhausen Concentration Camp. There were a number of attempts made which could have saved the life of Stalin's son. You would have expected the Soviet dictator to do anything to get his own son back, but this was not the case. There were different prisoner swaps proposed. This included swapping Yakov for Hitler's nephew, who was locked up in a Moscow prison, but this was rejected, as was another proposal to swap Stalin's son for Field Marshal Friedrich Paulus, who was seized at Stalingrad. Stalin claimed regarding this, "I do not trade field marshals for lieutenants." With this, Yakov Dzhugashvili's fate was sealed, and he was locked up inside of captivity, and Stalin claimed that, "Yakov won't get out of captivity. The fascists will shoot him. No, Yakov would prefer death to betraying the motherland." Sachsenhausen, where he was locked up, was a very rough camp, and the conditions here were savage. But Yakov made things worse for himself, as he often got into physical fights with British prisoners, and he was separated a number of times from them. He got more and more irate, and this resulted in an incident that led to his death. It was claimed on the 14th of April 1943 that Stalin's son tried to make an escape from the camp, and he managed to get past some tripwires and get to the fence on the boundary of Sachsenhausen. It's not known if the guards allowed him to get that far, as they were worried about killing the son of Stalin, because he could have been of use to the Germans in the future. Stalin's son was then confronted by an SS guard, and he screamed at him, "Don't be a coward, shoot, shoot." And as he went to grab the high-voltage electric fence, the guard fired a single bullet allegedly into him, killing him. Other accounts claim that he, after having an argument with British prisoners, ran into the fence, ending his life and ordeal, and an autopsy claimed that he had died from electrocution before he was shot. The story of Yakov Dzhugashvili's life is one which is dominated by neglect and terrible treatment that he was subjected to at the hands of his father. Yakov had been abandoned by his father, one of the most powerful men in the world at the time, and he saw his capture as a stain upon his reputation. It was claimed that the guard certainly shot Yakov 4 times, but it is now known that he fired the bullets into Yakov's already dead body. This was a terrible way for him to go, and by touching the high-voltage electric fence, Yakov put his life to an end, and the torture ordeal he had been subjected to for years. It wasn't just inside the camp that he was subjected to torture, but at the hands of his father Yakov was treated truly awfully. Stalin allegedly was deeply upset when he learned of his son's death, but he may have been dominated by the regret that he had with regards to how he truly treated his eldest son. Thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.